Good Dirt podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now, the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in. Good morning, Mom.
Good morning.
So we wanted to record this episode because we've had several conversations with interview guests that have hit on this topic of the word that we've come up with is eco-spirituality. So incorporating spirituality with that of our love for the earth and for nature and the work that we're doing here. And we've mentioned it a few times. Sometimes in interviews, we're less vocal about it, I would say, in Lady Farmer branding and such. But Lady Farmer as an idea really came out of a spiritual place, I think, for both of us. Sort of touching into a divine feminine energy that we wanted to bring forward, which has been really fun and has totally stayed true throughout our whole adventure with this. So that's kind of what we're doing here today. And we have some notes on various interviews that have made us get to this spot and realize that we could have a little chat ourselves, kind of going over all of this and our own experience with it. And we'd had a conversation recently where I asked you about your own spiritual journey around all of these things. And we decided that we'd love to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So here we are. Here's that deep dive.
Yeah, and I think the idea for actually doing an episode like this kind of came out of our conversation that we had a few weeks ago. In one of the introductions, you had asked me to tell a little bit about my story leading up to my interest and fascination with these things. I think it was the Mary DeYoung intro. So I went back and told a little bit of that. And then it seems like a lot of our more recent interviews, we have really delved into this a lot more. And the term eco-spirituality, I don't know exactly when or how it originated, but I can say that when I was younger, 20 and 30 years ago, I had certainly never heard that term because I don't think it was as much in the collective realm as it is now. And maybe it's not even there now yet much. I mean, we talk about it, we understand it, but what do you think? Do you think most of the people walking around out there would understand what you meant if you asked if they knew anything about eco-spirituality?
I think so. I think people would mostly wager to guess, but I imagine that it means something different to everyone.
Right. So the term eco-spirituality, as it suggests, is the study or exploration of ecology and spirituality together. And in a way, this is a real ironic thing in that cultures before ours, probably it was never divided in the first place. The ecology, the environment, the natural world around them, and spirituality were never two separate things until I can't really say when exactly that happened.
We've had a recent conversation that is making me think that it was a sort of enlightenment period when we started naming things. And we sort of innately created a disconnection.
Yeah, I realized that the one thing all the conversations have in common is the separation between humans and the environment, the separation between humans and nature. And of course, as we've talked about so many times, it's not a true separation. It is a perceived separation. Somewhere along the way, humans decided that they were above the laws of nature. They didn't have to follow the same rules, that nature was there for their use and disposal, really. And so we've created an entire civilization and culture around that idea that the natural world is meant for us to use up. And in our recent conversation with Paul Hawken, I was fascinated to hear him talk about in his experience and interaction with many, many indigenous tribes across the globe in his decades of work on this. What he encountered was they don't even have an understanding of that separation, even the language of humans are connected to nature. We are connected to nature. That in itself suggests a separation, suggests an otherness. So even in talking about eco-spirituality and the effort to bring those two ideas together, it suggests a separation or a severance, which of course in our Western culture that has occurred. And so in my understanding, the whole field and study and exploration of eco-spirituality is a way to heal that and bring it back together and try to heal that vision, separation, severance. Because that separation right there, you might argue, is the root cause of everything we're experiencing now in the environment. In terms of the Anthropocene being we're in the era where humans are having a definite and measurable and marked impact on the environment. And you go back and say, how did we get here? How did we get where humans are actually affecting the environment and not in a positive way for the most part? And that is because we have lived and evolved our societies as if we are separate from nature. So that's what I see as common to all these discussions that we've been having with these authors and teachers and mentors and just these fascinating people who have read and studied this stuff for decades.
What does that have to do you think, with healing and how self-healing is related to the earth healing?
So going back to the interview we had with Ian C. Williams, he wrote the book Soil and Spirit, Seeds of Purpose, Nature's Insight, and the Deep Work of Transformational Change. So I really loved talking to Ian, who earlier in his life, in a period when he was fighting addiction, he describes that he had an environmental awakening. Like it dawned on him that the natural world, the environment, tuning into it, immersing himself in it, learning from it was going to be essential for his own healing. And it has been, and it started this journey that he is still on, exploring with people the idea of self-actualization, that is like healing yourself. So healing yourself inwardly so that we can heal the world and the systems in our relationship in the environment outwardly. He proposes the idea that creating a regenerative future means committing to self-cultivation, really deep introspection, exploration and healing of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that just personally, my experience with that has been true. That what has kept me excited about Lady Farmer and the Good Dirt is just, how can I live my life in a way that I'm, happier and feeling more healed around things. And it generally, taking care of, I would say, like taking care of my own environment really contributes to my own self-healing. So I see that in daily practice as well.
That reminds me so much of the conversation with Asia Suler. Her book, Mirrors in the Earth, Reflections on Self-Healing from the Living World. She talks a lot about the healing power of the earth, of being in it. And she encourages us to have self-compassion and self-understanding and empathy as a means of personal healing and ecological healing. That's Asia Suler.
Well, okay. What have you been thinking about the idea of eco-spirituality and the good dirt? And what do you feel like we haven't really explored too much on the good dirt yet, but we keep touching on? What are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that the piece about the language that's come up so frequently is really sticking with me a lot and making me think a lot. How we can talk about it and practice it without perpetuating the otherness. So the term eco-spirituality, like I said, I don't know when it started. I was not aware of that word 30 years ago. So I don't know how it evolved, but the putting together of those ideas of ecology and spirituality, that is like making an assumption that those are two separate things. So I'm so curious as how we ever separated them in the first place. And you see this all over. I mean, thank goodness for Earth Day and the environmental movement and all of these efforts to help us heal the damage that has been done, to help us change our practices, our habits. But all that is still assuming this separateness. And I'm not sure where to go from there on it. I don't know how far back you have to go to shift to where humans lived on the earth as if the earth was sacred. The earth was sacred to their survival, our survival. Somehow we left that realm.
Yeah, I also feel like there's a tendency to sort of pine and yearn for this like time bygone, that I'm not sure is necessarily productive after a point. And I wonder if we think about it like instead of like how far back do we have to go, like really just what do we have to do? What does it look like now? And what does it look like in the future to live like that? And how can we live like that? That feels like has more energy for me.
Yeah, and in saying that, I don't mean we need to go back because we said so many times in our conversations on here, we're not going to go back.
But what does it look like to even think about going forward? What if we do that? I think that's just hard to imagine because we haven't done it yet.
Exactly. And remember, I asked Paul Hawken that exact question. I said, what do we do? And he said two words. He said, go outside.
He said, "No offense, but go outside," because we were all on our computers.
So yes. All right. I like that. Moving forward, can we say though, since we talk about cycle and the circle is a symbol of infinity, circle's not anchored in time. A circle goes round and around. So I like to think about circling back as a society, circling back and forward with this idea of rediscovering our place in the entire ecosystem, realizing that we're inherently connected to it and it's something that we have to internalize as sacred. So, what would the meaning of sacred be in that sense? People might be intimidated by the word sacred. They feel like you're, worshiping something other than our culture has told us to worship. What do you think?
Yeah, or taking something seriously or letting the gravity of something or the beauty of something overwhelm you. There's so much to feel these days. We're so overstimulated. That can be really overwhelming. But again, with nature, touch the grass, feet in the dirt. That is actually very grounding and is a big antidote to the overstimulation. So the overstimulation that we're feeling from technology and made up human things.
Well, I just looked up what does sacred mean? What's the definition of sacred? And it says connected with God or the gods or dedicated to a religious purpose, and so deserving veneration. So I think that's really interesting. I think we've really hit on something here. I think something that bothers people is connecting the earth with religion, because I think across thousands of years of our Western culture, religion has been separated from nature. And, we were pondering this a few minutes ago. How did it occur? But I think, you can look back and say, for so long, and still to this day, nature is hard. Nature is your physical survival and comfort, and thriving or not thriving depends on nature. And so I think part of the evolution of this separation mentality was that there was something better afterwards. So after the physical life, there was a greater reward, eternal happiness. There was an end to any kind of suffering the humans were experienced on the planet. And there was a way, in other words, there was a way out. So I think maybe that contributed to religion being separated from the environment, because it was hard. Survival has been a hard thing for humans.
I think that's interesting and leads me to think about how we acknowledge the loss and grief of climate change and where we are with that, because it's really hard. It's a really hard thing to navigate, and also live, with more positivity and intention really into the future, as opposed to dreading and grieving.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot with Leah Rampey. She addresses actually facing the reality of the climate change and, like you just said, acknowledging the grief of it. And then as part of that healing, you open your heart. You open your heart to the senses of the natural world. And again, that internal healing translates to external healing. We touched on that so much with Mary DeYoung as well, talking about connecting with place and trying to heal that sacred connection to the earth where you are. She's in the Pacific Northwest, and she does all this work in her community with rewilding the damaged landscapes, and she does retreats, and she takes people to Scotland, and Leah Rampey takes people to Scotland to Iona. Just seeking that sense of sacredness of place in the earth, on the earth, is really essential to us recognizing and internalizing our own grief so we can turn it around, like kind of compost it like good dirt.
Oh, I love that idea of composting it.
So Emma, over the years of your growing up and our experience living in a very quickly developing suburban area, and we talked about this a little bit before, and how we saw the landscape around us changing like almost daily, going from a rural area to area filled with shopping centers and new schools and all this progress, right? Of this rapidly growing suburban area. And through the years, and you're coming into adulthood and now doing this work on the good dirt, lady farmer, everything that went behind that, and these interviews that we have with these people that have been studying this and immersed in it. What do you have to say about your own evolution with it? And where are you now with it?
That's a great question. I think that growing up, I was really aware, probably because you would tell me about it. You would point it out, and also I could see it with my own eyes. The forest disappearing in the name of mostly, honestly, McMansions and shopping centers, which changed the way like different intersections looked. Because, you'd get used to like shadows and trees and stuff. And then all of a sudden things would be very open and bare. That was always kind of sad to me. But we also made it an effort as a family to spend a lot of time in nature and camping and stuff. So I feel like growing up, had an appreciation for nature and found a lot of solace in it, and would seek out places that were, I guess, just alive in general. Then we moved to the city. And in the city, I've actually also found a lot of solace. Cities, especially well-designed cities and older cities, have a way of having their own kind of beauty, I think because of all the nature that is interspersed with the city part. And I happen to live in a part of the city that's very close to the river, and there are lots of trees. And I still surprise myself sometimes if I'm having a rough day or just feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like I was saying earlier, or overstimulated. It really just barely takes a few minutes surrounded by mostly nature, which is, a 5-minute walk from my house. I can go into a little park and feel better. So, yeah, I would say that remembering that I am connected with nature and I am nature and just tending to that every so often and cultivating that good dirt and doing what I can to just make my own immediate environment feel better, from directly outside of me to a little bit wider to a little bit wider, and connecting with my community. I think that our human community is also ecology, right? And um yeah,
Absolutely. You just said it, the human community and also the community of all living things. Can you just speak to the term eco spirituality? Can you speak to that term a little more specifically?
I think that eco spirituality is, like you said so well, the sacredness of the natural world around us and treating it as such with the same respect that we would any other type of thing that we would worship. It's just treating it with the sacredness that it deserves.
Reverence, as the definition suggests.
Yes, reverence. That's a good word.
And something really fascinating came up in the conversation with Osprey Oriole Lake. She wrote The Story Is in Our Bones about climate justice, how there's so much work going on right now for the rights of nature, the literal legal rights of nature. She says it's a growing movement that recognizes the rights of ecosystems and aims to protect the natural world. So I think it's very fascinating that this idea of the rights of nature has reached the level of the legal system in some of these areas. And it really requires that we come back into balance with nature and honoring the indigenous knowledge that has been abandoned. And that is key to our creating a sustainable future, healing those relationships and addressing all the uncomfortable conversations and the injustices that come up as a result of this separation, racism, human rights issues, all the calamities that occur in the global south. You know, something else Paul Hawken brings up is that environmental degradation is directly reflected in human rights, because these places where things happen, where the floods and the earthquakes are often in places where there's not the infrastructure or the systems to really help people recover from that. And these climate related events cause the deepest suffering to people that have been the least supported by our current system. Again, that idea of, we can't go back. Like, we can't really remove ourselves from technology. We can't really remove ourselves from the ways of current civilization, but we can take time to immerse ourselves in nature more, implement that more in our lives. I love the conversation with Claire Dunn, and we can't all do this, but I love that she did it and she wrote about it. She went out into nature and lived for a year completely without technology, on her own, by herself, and completely disconnected from all that to see what it was like. And, she never had the intention to stay there forever. It was like an experience. And now she's come back and teaches about it and talks about it. And we had that wonderful conversation with her about that year, completely out in nature.
So where do you want to leave folks today? What do you think about where you're currently on your eco-spirituality journey, and what is lighting you up and keeping you inspired?
Well, again, to reflect on these past conversations that have really influenced me over the last, especially I would say, 2 years. The words of our guests stick with me. I read the books. They have really become part of my life.
So, in conclusion, our own experiences with eco-spirituality, the idea of eco-spirituality, have been so informed by our conversations here on the Good Dirt podcast. And we wanted to take the opportunity to just dig in a little more with each other and to kind of go over some of these episodes specifically and chat about what came up in them specifically for us. So we hope that you enjoyed this little trip down the rabbit hole, and you are welcome to look up these episodes individually in the show notes and let us know what you think. And we'll continue thinking about these things and talking about them. And we definitely have a reading list for you as well. We'll link all of the books that we referenced in the show notes. And yeah. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.